undernourishment in Africa. Whilst there's been an overall increase in food production over the last 40 years, it hasn't matched population growth, and it's mostly been achieved through land expansion. Yields for maize, the staple crop of the subsistence farmer in Africa, for maize, have been almost stagnant. Yet yield of maize in Asia and Latin America has nearly tripled over the same time. These productivity increases have been mainly achieved through adoption of new agricultural technologies, or improved agricultural technologies, that has seen us comfortably able to yield between 5 and 10 tonnes of maize per hectare. Yet in Africa, adoption of these technologies has been low, and subsequently it's not unusual to yield well below half a tonne of maize per hectare. My research aims to understand why these technologies haven't been embraced by the African smallholder farmer. But the problem comes back to systematic issues with how we understand adoption. So this is how the literature tends to frame it, and that is in a binary way. It's yes or no, adoption or non-adoption. But the problem with that is adoption is actually, it's not an outcome, it's a process. And when we frame it in a binary manner, we lose a whole depth of meaning and a whole depth of understanding. In a nutshell, we don't have a good understanding of agricultural adoption in Africa. Our methodologies are flawed, our estimates vary wildly, and subsequently, we don't have a good footing to ask the right research questions. So a recent example, there's 2 studies that have come out on minimum tillage adoption in Malawi. So remember, this is the same locations, the same technology, and the same time period. One estimated 94% adoption, and the other just 3%. And actually, the government of Malawi refrains from making national estimates because they say there is no methodology to adequately do so. So there's obvious questions about how we're generating our adoption data for agricultural technologies. So what we needed to do first was rethink the actual theory around adoption. So what's going to flash up here is how we went about reframing that discussion. So that's come through about 60 iterations or 60 revisions, and that's come through extensive literature review, as well as experience on the ground in Africa and a little bit of creativity. So in blue, we have the what, and that's where we unambiguously define what it means to adopt a series of agricultural technologies in practice, not just in theory. In the green, we have the how, and that's where we break apart the technology adoption process into 10 distinct stages. And then in the orange, we have the why, and that's our theory of change to explain farmer decision-making and farmer behaviour. So in Africa, maize is life, quite literally. And my passion is about sustainably intensifying those maize and legume-based systems. This means creating more food and more money with less risk and less environmental impact. So we obtained a data set of over 50,000 plots from the International Maize and Wheat Research Institute, and we ran that through our first two frameworks to understand the what and how of adoption of 5 different sustainable intensification technologies in 5 African countries. To supplement that, I spent more than a year in African communities exploring the why. So that's collecting 325 in-depth, semi-structured interviews with farmers, but also non-farm actors, so village leaders, community and farmer-based organisations, researchers, extension officers, NGOs and policymakers. And what did we find? Well, let's imagine that this room is your typical African community and you're all smallholder farmers. Now, your main point of contact to learn that information is going to be me, your government extension officer. Now, my job is a pretty impossible one because I've probably got 20 to 25 other rooms that I'm responsible for. And in the real world, that can be upwards of 5,000 households. Indeed, in Uganda in 2015, there was only 18 government extension officers for a country of nearly 40 million people, and most of them are farmers. Did I mention that I probably also live about 20 kilometres away? But don't worry, I'll try and borrow that bicycle I share with all the government extension officers. That's if it was returned last night, if it's working, and if the roads aren't actually impassable due to the rains. So in reality, you're probably only going to see me a few times a year in this room. But not all of you, obviously, because I'm a busy man. So what will generally happen is I'm going to find somebody that's going to be by the roadside, and they're going to be my contact point in the community. So Manoj, congratulations. You're going to be our model farmer. Basically, Manosh is going to get a starter pack for this technology. So that's going to be filled with fertiliser, seed, herbicides and chemicals, some tools, everything that Manosh will need to do this technology. You're going to get a few days of training, and then I've got to pop off, and you're going to be responsible for teaching the rest of the community about this new technology. That's the theory of it anyway, but the practice turns out a little bit different. Now, to start with, for the people on this side of the room, you don't use this road over here, you've got your own road. So automatically, you're not really interacting over here with the model farmer. Don't worry about it. Not to mention the females on this side of the room. If this model farmer isn't part of your family network, it can be culturally inappropriate for you to approach him and to solicit information. We found that this can be up to 85% where we have unaware or unfamiliar farmers, as was the case for minimum tillage in Ethiopia. In the majority of cases, we found that it was between 30 and 60% of you that can remain unaware of the technology. Now, for the males on this side of the room, you might have seen the technology walking along the roadside or interacting with the model farmer. However, you've only seen it done by people who are receiving the free inputs to do so. So instead of inspiring you with the new technology and the yields you could get, what it actually does will inspire jealousy within you. You'll explain that it's a great technology and you'd love to do it if only somebody would give you the inputs to do it. This is only exacerbated when NGOs or the projects come in and give a few more little handouts, but it's never enough to cover the community. And what this does is ingrain a handout culture of waiting to be given something rather than acting with your own accord. And that's not to mention the unavailability or unaffordability of inputs. Of course the model farmer gets the best yields, but that's because they've got the best seed that isn't available in the market. They've got the herbicides and chemicals that are often counterfeit and don't work. You've got the working ones. And you've also got the machinery and the planting equipment that is simply unaffordable to the majority of smallholder farmers. So we found that not interested farmers, in the majority of cases across 5 technologies in 5 countries, accounted for upwards of 40% of the population. Now, that leaves just our front few rows that are actually able and willing to do this technology. But we found even you guys will struggle. Let's say that the farmers here know that they need to cover their soil with maize stover at the end of the season to protect it from the elements. But did anybody else notice all the goat poo in the room this morning? Well, that's because goats roam this room freely in the dry season, eating anything they come across. Oh, and did you also notice that there's no trees in this room? So if you want to cook dinner tonight, you're probably going to have to use that maize stover rather than protecting your soil. And although legumes are great for your soil, and we're telling you to grow lots of them, you don't know how to cook the legumes, or you don't like eating them. Or the market might be a really long way away, and even if you got there, you wouldn't be getting a lot of financial return. So that means that there's not going to be a lot of people still putting their hand up to be an adopter. And here's the final kicker. Now the project's packing up, and I'm going to take back these free starter packs. You can keep that. What's going to happen? Well, we found quite a large rate of disadoption. Now for minimum tillage in Malawi, for every 5 users, 3 eventually disadopted, and that was 2 in 5 in Kenya. So there's a whole lot of effort there for not a lot of return. So what can we do about this? Well, did anybody else notice the lack of this person? Got a bad thumb. The researcher. Well, a lot of the problems seem to stem back to the fact that the researcher isn't involved at that community level. What's happening is we're promoting technologies that haven't been made locally appropriate and tailored to the local conditions. And likewise, we haven't had a lot of research on the actual efficiency of our information delivery systems. What that means is that we've still, despite decades of assertions of participatory research and extension, it's still top-down, it's still linear, and we haven't got anything going back the other way. So, what our research is trying to do is to stimulate discussion on these issues by looking at the what, how and why of agricultural adoption. A world without hunger is within our reach, as long as we can get good, reliable, relevant science into the hands of smallholder farmers. Now I'd love to finish by telling you that you've all got a bag of fertiliser under your seat. But this isn't Oprah, budgets are getting a bit tight, and as we now know, this could be part of the problem. Thank you. you.